The Demon of Unrest by Erik Larson. Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States, November 6, 1860. About 5 months later, the South would fire on Fort Sumter, igniting the most catastrophic war in American history for Americans. In this book, Erik Larson focuses on exactly what happened in these 5 months, from the secession leaders in the Confederate States to the movements of Abraham Lincoln as he prepares to take over the presidency. This is a great story. It's like watching one of those scenes in an old Western movie at a saloon where you have a bunch of outlaws in a room and something happens and you know a fight's going to break out, and everyone has guns and everyone is thinking about their own guns, and they're looking at everyone that's thinking about their own guns, and everyone's wondering who's going to draw first. It's really a tense moment that's spread out over these 5 months. This is exactly what's going on at a national scale. You have South Carolina announcing that it's seceding from the Union, and then you have other southern states that are seceding, and they're starting to talk about this Confederacy joining together against the Union. And the big question is, what's the Union going to do about all this? And in every step, they're not actively announcing troops marching on the South, and so the South keeps going and down this path of secession. And so it's this game of, you feel like a war is going to happen, but you don't know when or how. And no one wants to be the one to pull the trigger to unleash this nightmare. I think the book does a good job of explaining the war from the perspective of the South, because you zoom into the Confederate leaders at the time and why they're doing what they're doing. The South had a culture of honor and gentlemanliness, and slavery was a part of that. So you can't really insult slavery without insulting the South itself and their whole code of honor. It was interesting to hear in this book issues of states' rights at this time, because you have some people arguing that slavery should be a state issue, even though they may disagree with it personally. Then there are the hardcore abolitionists saying there should be a federal ban. And then you have the opposite side coming from the South. So these are the arguments that people are having all over the country at this time. Also, getting to the mind of the southern states, it was fascinating to hear allusions to the American Revolution. Like you kind of recast the characters in the American Revolution in the Civil War terms, and the Unions are like England oppressing the culture of the South, and you have the brave Southern armies like the underdogs of America fighting for their liberty. It's funny to see things from the Confederate side. And also, of seeing things from the Confederate side, it's amazing to me how people in the South did not see a prolonged war coming. If there was going to be a war, it would be brief, but in all probability, they would just be able to secede, and that would be the end of it. I think the phrasing is, the war will not be able to fill a woman's thimble full of blood. It'll be so bloodless, which is astounding given what actually happened. I didn't know that much about James Buchanan besides him having the reputation as the worst president in history, but he's an interesting character. I didn't realize he was such a states' rights sort of person. He kind of reminded me of the Neville Chamberlain of his time, just trying to keep the peace at all costs and saying middle-of-the-road things to keep everyone happy that ended up keeping nobody happy. But at least he paved the way for Abraham Lincoln to fill the role as one of the best presidents we've ever had. I love the parts of the book talking from Major Anderson's perspective, because he's positioned at Fort Sumter, and he has these men, and he's waiting to hear from Washington what he's supposed to do, but they're doing this dance of trying not to say something that will provoke all-out war, but they're not giving him any instructions, so he has to try to figure out what to do on his own. And meanwhile, the South Carolina says they're their own country now, and they're building up battlements around the bay of where Fort Sumter is, because Fort Sumter is surrounded. So they're sitting there at Fort Sumter watching this massive military force get bigger and bigger, like you know that it's coming, and you're kind of looking around thinking, any day now, Washington, like send us some reinforcements, tell us what to do, something. Just the uncomfortable spot that they were put in and how they reacted to that. It was such a fun part of the book to read. The book does a great build-up to when Fort Sumter is finally fired on, and it's really exciting, like hearing everything that happens. Spoiler alert though, and maybe it's not a spoiler alert if you know history better than I do, but I really didn't know how the details of how the battle ended. But apparently, no one died, which was a big surprise. I just assumed it was a battle, so lots of people died on both ends or whatever. So this big buildup actually didn't have much of a payoff, and I didn't see that coming. But in the end, it's funny. He talks about the big Civil War machine going and all the slave states congealing into the Confederacy, and the way that he describes it, you kind of read it and think, there's no way the North is going to win this thing. Like, the Confederates are going to have their own country in no time. I love what Erik Larson did here, mixing the story of what's going on with Fort Sumter with Major Anderson, Abraham Lincoln, and the election and everything that he's thinking about, trying to get the country under control. And I love the perspective of the Southern leaders who are trying to, whip the Southerners into a frenzy so they can actually break free of the Union. It's fascinating. All in all, I thought this was a great read. I loved the way it flowed. I loved learning about all the history. I'm going to give this 4.5 stars.